the webinar has completed, you will actually be able to go to our website and access the audio and the slides for the presentation so that you can do that at your leisure. Just a few announcements as we get started. First of all, as one of our colleagues in the office, Becky Dale, our COO, she says, give yourself time. Give yourself this time today and try to avoid distractions and practice what it means to pay attention. Webinars are very difficult to pay attention to. They're not as personal as many of us would like to be able to convey information. And so this is an opportunity to actually practice paying attention. And feel free to ask questions, and we'll tell you a little bit about how to do that in a minute. Everyone is going to be automatically on mute in order to allow for the best sound quality on the webinar. And as we go, we can unmute you one at a time if you would like to ask questions or engage in any discussion at the end of the webinar. We will allow for some time for that to take place. You may participate via microphone and speakers on your computer or phone. And if you're joining only by phone without also logging in by the computer to get an audio PIN number, we won't be able to hear you. We won't even know if you're actually there, but you can hear us. So if you want to speak in the webinar, you will actually need to log in via your computer as well so that we can see those questions and chat information coming across our screen. And as with any presentation, if you have any thoughts or suggestions or questions after it's over or throughout and you'd like to ask those after the webinar, you're most welcome to do that. There's a question box. If you're logged in via computer, there's a question box on your screen to comment or ask questions. And this might be a really good opportunity. I'm going to pull mine up just so that I can see any of you if you want to practice. This might be a good opportunity to try that right now. Type in your county and maybe add what draws you to this topic and why you're interested in this for today. I'm going to just give a couple of minutes to see if you guys can practice a little bit with your question or chat box so that we can see if that's functioning properly for you before we get started. So let's just give that about a minute. I see one coming in. Kate, do you see any others?
I do. I see Roseau County, Clay
Okay.
County.
Great.
Hennepin County, Becker County, Ramsey County. So
awesome. Okay. Okay, great. And if at any point you'd like to offer a suggestion or a question and we're in the middle of presenting, just go ahead and raise your hand if you'd like to speak. I think there's a little icon there with a hand you can click on. Is that right? And you can actually raise your hand to ask a question, or you can certainly type it in on the chat. And Kate will be monitoring those questions, and then she'll notify me when maybe one is relevant that we actually take a break in the middle of the presentation to answer, or if not, we will wait to the end and spend about 15 minutes at the end going over question and answer. So today, we're going to be talking about something that really takes the neuroscience, the adverse childhood experience study, the idea of resilience, the idea of healthy communities to the workplace. We're going to look at what does that look like in the workplace, in your life, really in general, serving as a leader, and what does that mean? So we read about leadership development all the time. It's in articles, Forbes magazine, you know, the Time magazine articles, The Economist, on the news, you know, CBS, and we're always talking about leaders, our politicians, social causes. We had a whole movement last year on Occupy Wall Street. We had, I mean, these things are all over the news, and we really talk a lot about leadership, but we sometimes miss that this leadership is not just in a professional sense. It's a grassroots skill that all of us really have the potential to utilize. And what's important is that we understand what leadership really is, and is that a positive thing in and of itself? So we'll talk a little bit about that. So I want you to be thinking of being a leader as a parent, being a leader as a caregiver, as a teacher, someone that's on staff in a school building, in your maybe your faith-based institution, but just to understand that leadership carries everywhere you are. It's from you, and you take it wherever you go in your world. And part of understanding that it's not necessarily positive or negative is, what does leadership mean? We can just go through history, right, and pick out some people that have been leaders, and very successful ones, even if they are leaders that don't have the values that you and I believe in. There's a lot of examples of that. So let's, what would some of those be? I can think of one particularly strong that comes to mind in World War II that didn't have any of my values. And so, you had Adolf Hitler, you have very positive examples, you have Gandhi, so you can have all these people that come to your mind throughout history, and they did lead. And that is in all of us. We all lead. So it's not, leadership is not automatically positive, right? So we need to think about what is critical then in leadership. What is the right kind of leadership for us? What is an honorable type of leadership? A leadership that understands actually who is in the room, right? One that understands, has knowledge, one that has empathy for what is happening in the room, understanding the stories that are present in the room, someone that has the ability to make decisions even when it's difficult, and to make them with integrity. What about the ability to motivate others? And is it possible to persuade and lead other people to do things that are not so positive? Yes. And so leadership, if we don't really provide a frame for leadership when we talk about this in the first place, then we could get confused, because leadership on its own is, like I said, it's not necessarily good or bad. And today we want to talk about how to use our leadership in a positive way to actually leverage change, to make things happen in communities and in society, in our family, in our homes, that will make positive change for our lives, for our children, and for our future. And so let's talk a little bit about what is critical in making a leader. And that really we need to kind of set a tone for that it's not a position necessarily. And it's certainly not just a title, right? It is action and example. It is modeling. It's being able to show someone else what can be, to take a vision and put it into action. So this particular presentation, though, is about trauma-informed leadership. And what does that mean? Why is that important? And what does it include? And many times, when we talk about using the word trauma, should we even use the term trauma-informed? Is that negative? Does that connote something negative? Maybe we want to use a different word, like resilience-informed leadership, or strengths-based leadership, or leadership with safety, or compassionate leadership. Or how about just saying the right type of leadership versus the wrong type of leadership? So as mentioned earlier, everyone is a leader. We all lead, and we all influence other people, whether we mean to or not, whether it's intentional or not. And so today, let's just take the next hour and a half and focus on what makes the best leader, the leader that gives us the results we're looking for in ourselves and in others. And for now, carving out a little space to understand what trauma-informed leadership is and why that's important. So think about all of the different models of leadership that are out there. We have so many different possibilities. We have institutes for leadership and leadership classes and courses and things in business around leadership, things in and social sciences around leadership. But what if many of our best leadership models, the ones we're the most familiar with, are leaving something out? Something that prevents many or most of us from even hearing and applying all of those great lessons and great information. What if there's a physiological dynamic, a biology, an issue with our biology that many times interrupts our ability to choose? It could be something as simple as stress. Stress and its impact on our body, our mind, our emotions, and our spirit. So to understand the impact of stress on us when we're wanting to be a great leader, we really want to be a leader with honor and a leader with integrity. We really want to leverage change. We want to take our ideas of what could be, and we want to build something. But sometimes it's important when we do that to understand what's happening to us as we go through the process of intentional leadership. Leadership in and of itself has stress. And so it's important to understand the impact of stress on our brain and how that interrupts and interacts our ability to be our best self when we lead and interact with others. So to start with a baseline of an understanding of stress and how it impacts us, it's important to know a little bit about neuroscience, and we're just going to talk about it a little bit in today's presentation because I think if we don't really have that baseline, it's going to be hard to capture really what the possibilities are for us when we're exploring leadership internally and what are some of our limitations. So just thinking about how we're made. Okay, our human gift is that we have many areas of our brain with which to contribute thoughts and behavior to ourselves, to our families, to the world. We have our initial part of our brain development that is in our survival mechanism. It's automatic. It's our autonomic system, and it includes a survival mechanism. And in that part of our brain, in the hind brain, in the back of the skull, that's the oldest, most familiar part of your brain. It's the part that is intended to keep you alive at all costs. It's the part that really everything defaults to when you are in fear or in threat. And that's important. That's how we're made, and it's important. We need that to survive. Then we have another part of our brain in the middle of the brain, the midbrain, the limbic mechanism. And this is really an emotional command center. This is our hormonal control center, our neurotransmitter control center. This part of the brain is fundamental to helping us moderate associations, information, storing memory, understanding how to pair together language with memory so that we are fully able to experience both an automatic and survival reaction to information as well as an emotional response to information. And then as humans, we have a part of our brain that maps out and develops that no other mammal has that we're aware of to date. And that is our frontal and prefrontal cortex. And that part of our brain really has what we call our executive functioning. It has our judgment, our planning, our course correction. It has the ability to set intentional boundaries and intentional learning around things like safety and attachment. It's not reactive, it's responsive. This part of our brain has a lot of intentionality behind it, and this is really the part that most people think about when they think about leadership. And the reality is that leadership the best leadership must include all three of these components, all three. So I want to talk a little bit about that as we move on. So again, the intent for all of us as human beings is to stay alive first, right? We have to be safe. We have to be alive and alert. Emotionally, we want to be able to feel and categorize and associate our experiences in a way that is helpful to us lifelong. And then cognitively, in our frontal lobe, we want to be able to think about and plan for new experiences based on what we've already known and already associated our interactions with. And when we're able to do that, then we can fully use this gift that we've been given in leadership with others and for others. So it's important to know that we all have the same biologic response to stress. This is not that something is wrong with us. This is about what is happening to us. This is our story, physiologically. We have to understand our story for us to begin to understand how to react and respond and be relational with other human beings. So regardless of where we come from, our ethnic backgrounds, our racial backgrounds, our gender, our preferences, it doesn't matter what part of the country we came from, what part of the world, our size, our weight, we all experience stress, and we all have the same type of response to stress. It's a biological reaction, and stress and our response to it can be adapted in our brain and be hardwired into our body. And that's what we'll talk a little bit about, that is potentially something that can get in our way of being the best leader we can be. So all of us have our brain development plotting out the same way, right? From about 0 to 13, our brain develops from our spinal cord up through the hindbrain, the survival mechanism, and it goes into the limbic area, the midbrain area. And then around the age of 13, really 13 to 14, it changes direction, and it starts at the front of the brain in the frontal and prefrontal cortex area, and it goes back and maps from the midbrain back out to the frontal lobe. And the final part, the last part that actually gets programmed, for lack of a better term, is the prefrontal cortex. And that whole process takes between 25 and 26 years of age. And this is all very, very much evolving. We are seeing an enormous amount of change take place in brain research. And so today we know, or we believe, that it takes about 26 years for the brain to map. And, you know, in a couple of weeks we may see new research that comes out that tells us something different. But for now, this gives us at least a context to understand what's happening in our bodies. And it's important to know that around the ages of 12 to 14, that not only is that child going through puberty many times in that period of time, but they're also changing direction in their brain development dramatically. So no longer is it that concrete thinking area of the survival and limbic mechanism, storing information and facts. It's now more theory and abstract, and it's developing from a different direction in the front of the brain. So it's a very tense time for anybody, whether there's stress or no stress, between those ages of 12 and 14. So one of the things about the human brain that is so fascinating is that it has to have interaction. It has to have relational interaction for it to map and develop in an optimal way. It's experience dependent, and we are made and built so that we thrive in relationships. We are physiologically wired and prepared to thrive when we interact. And so our brain begins with very little neurosynaptic connections when we're born. The human child has not a lot of survival instincts or the ability or defensive instincts at the point of birth, like say a baby horse would have a foal, or a baby shark, or a baby kangaroo. There's animals have a completely different threshold of competency to stay alive than the human baby when the human baby is born. And And so it's really important to understand that that human brain is preparing itself so that all three regions are going to be active and interactive, not just that survival mechanism. So the baby is born, the human baby is born waiting and prepped for experience to help it develop and grow, so that all areas of the brain are equitably emboldened and empowered in the developmental process. Something else that occurs in early childhood is a dynamic called arborization and pruning. So this is really the overarching theme of this is neurological prioritizing. So early in childhood, you have this massive burst of neurosynaptic connections that takes place. Just an incredible number, and I'll show you a slide here in a minute to kind of show you how it just gets incredibly intense between 0, which I'm going to say is conception, not prenatal, but conception to 3 is a real pivotal time for development of the brain. There's also a lot of other very critical things that happen later in brain development, but in that conception to 3 period of time, it is extremely important that the child is free from stress that is overwhelming. So in this period of time where you have this massive neurosynaptic development, what we call arborization, the brain then begins around the age of 12 to 13 determine what has been utilized the most. What types of things have received the most energy and attention? What has your brain required of itself to be able to stay alive and to be able to live in the environment in which it finds itself? And based on what has been used in the brain then begins to atrophy away or prune. It's called pruning, but it's really more like an atrophy process that takes place in the neurosynaptic connections. When they're underutilized, they atrophy, very similar to any of our other muscle systems. When they're underutilized, our body begins to put less energy there, less fuel there, and those things begin to shrink back and be pruned away from regular usage. And our brain does the same thing around 12 to 14 as it determines what you're using, and then it will pare that down. And then those things that continue throughout the life course become myelinated. So all of those neurosynaptic connections that help you associate an action with experience, with responsiveness, those things get wrapped and reinforced by proteins called myelin, and they are hardwired now. Your experiences become hardwired into your biology. And all of this has a significant impact on your ability to lead, and to lead in a way that you really want to be able to lead. Now, when we're under threat, our body is prepared to saturate our brain with a chemical called cortisol in order to keep us safe. And this cortisol has the ability to kind of use an off switch for certain areas of the brain that the brain does not perceive you have to have in order to stay alive. So if you are very triggered and you are under extreme threat, or you perceive you're under extreme threat, then the cortisol infusion becomes greater and greater until the midbrain and the frontal lobe are no longer active. And the part of the brain that is heavily active is the survival mechanism, right? Because that's we have to have that response in our body. That keeps us safe, and it prepares us for the environment that we're in, so that we don't make decisions and waste time thinking about something. If we're really in danger, we want to be able to act and protect ourselves. And this process helps us do that. However, we're only built to withstand about 20 to 23 minutes of a full infusion of cortisol at any given time. And beyond that, the brain begins to adapt. It begins to become more capable in a threatening environment. which is important, right? If you're going to be in a threatening environment, your brain is going to adapt so that it is more protective, it's more defensive, it's more ready to respond in a fight, flight, or freeze way. And I want you to think about this in terms of leading in your life. Think about this in terms of your interactions with other people. Think about this in terms of your workplace, okay? There's a lot of things that this gets in the way of when you're not having to keep yourself safe, right? When you're in a workplace environment that is safe, it's hard for you to calm down. It's hard for you to put defenses down and really interact in a safe and healthy way. That's hard because you've been conditioned to defend and protect. And so when we talk about what is the optimum environment for children, we talk about a childhood that is going to prepare them for the adulthood that they're going to experience. And the hope is that that adulthood is going to be nonviolent. It is going to be less dangerous. So we want the childhood, the brain adaptation, we want to ensure that it occurs in such a way as to prepare a child for a nonviolent environment where all three regions of the brain can operate equitably. And there's not portions of that brain that are shut down at any given point in time where you're not able to engage all of you with someone else. So here's an example of that neurological prioritizing. So at birth you have a limited amount of neurosynaptic connections. At the age of 6 you can see this massive arborization, and at that 12 to 14-year-old range you see some pruning from underutilized areas back to what you utilize. And so if you're heavily utilizing autonomic skills of safety and attachment and nurturing and safe relationship with adults, then that's what will be retained. If you have had to keep yourself safe and be on defense and be alert and vigilant and not calm down because your environment was more dangerous and threatening, then those other things, the things about safety and attachment and calm relational interaction, those things will become underutilized and will begin to atrophy in the brain. And here's just an example of a nerve cell on the left, a neuron, a nerve cell not in the presence of cortisol, basically. And then on the other side, what it looks like when it's in that negative or toxic stress environment of cortisol. It's not that it's not developing, it's just not it's just really not active at all. And that's important. That keeps us alive when we're in danger. But we're wanting to build, we want to build brains that hopefully will create an environment of safe and healthy well-being in society, and we want to create brains that are going to be able to lead in that society. This slide just shows you how rapid the growth of the brain development is, neurosynaptic wise. You've got the 5-day brain and the 2 months and a year and 28 years, and you can see that the 1-year-old brain more likely resembles a brain that's almost 30 than one just 12 months earlier. And I want to be really intentional about saying that this is not about birth to 3. Your brain does not begin developing at birth. If your brain develops, it's one of the first things in the fetal body structure that develops at conception. And you begin to have the neural bud as one of the first things, if not the first thing, that begins to develop just almost immediately upon conception. So you have a lot of little, for lack of a better term, time capsules that are being developed in the brain and planted for later development in utero. So what happens to us in utero is very important too. So again, I don't want you to leave the presentation thinking there's anything wrong with the brain. On the contrary, it's more talking about the environment, right? Our brain is an incredible organ, and it has a masterful ability to adapt and adjust to the demands placed before us. If we need to survive, then growing up in a non-threatening environment may not serve us as well, right? Likewise, if we grow up in a dangerous or violent environment, it would be challenging for us to adjust our behavior to a non-violent one. So some of the behavioral implications, I want you to look at this in terms of biology, not as much by willfully behaving in this way, but more in terms of how our past, how our histories become hardwired into our behavior. So on the left-hand side, what is happening? Okay, what if someone is really hypervigilant? Okay, what you're seeing, what you can intuit from seeing that behavior is that it's hard to calm down. That individual has a hard time calming down because if they've had to grow up keeping themselves safe all of their life, then it's going to be really hard for them to calm down, because calming down would be dangerous, right? You wouldn't be prepared to take care of yourself if that happened. So again, routinized defense. What is happening? What it can cause is you're always prepared to fight. You're always prepared to go to anger or defense or protection. You're overly aware of your surroundings. You are ready to make sure that you are protected and safe. That's number one. And the frontal lobe, the thoughtfulness, the responsiveness, those things are less visible in that individual. Externally in tune with the environment, right? Because if you're going to keep yourself safe, if you're going to be paying attention to safety and protection, then you're going to be really in tune with where everyone is sitting in the room, what they're wearing, what their posture is like, their nonverbals, the sounds in the room. You're going to really be in tune with what's happening out there. And the more you have to keep yourself aware of your environment to keep yourself safe, the less energy you have to be in tune with yourself, your needs, your body clues, your impact on others, your own worldview, your beliefs and values. Those things receive less energy over time. You know, you have really strong survival skills. You're really, really capable of being able to make some great insights, and intuition is going to be strong with you. But it can also cause you to be very quick to make assumptions about other people, sizing everything up really fast, and then that becomes a barrier to trust. And assumptions don't really have a lot of accuracy. Most of the time, you're really kind of making up things in your head about other people without a lot of knowledge of what that looks like in reality. Many times when you're less in tune with yourself and your needs and your values, and you spend most of your time in tune with other people to protect yourself, you begin to be hard on yourself. You begin to see your life not really unfolding in the way you would like it to. So you begin to target yourself through blaming and shaming terms. You have lower self-esteem. You begin to think something's wrong with you. You get into a victim stance many times. And when you become a victim, it's real hard for you to have personal accountability. And we'll talk about that more in detail later. You have a tendency to reenact painful episodes. So think about the workplace and how many of you have had people in the workplace that stir up drama when there isn't any. Well, I think all of us, right? We all know those things have happened, and we may even be personally responsible for some of those things. But if you've been in your childhood prepared for defending yourself, and those are the skills that you have the strongest and most reinforced, then when there's not a occasion to use your best skills, you will create an occasion to use your best skills, right? So you have to practice those new skills. You really have to practice this new way of mapping your frontal lobe and mapping your emotional command center, and really practice using those parts of the brain that perhaps may have been underutilized in your childhood. Another thing that is happening is that you can really be quick to criticize, really quick to judge, and that can cause a lot of resentment. It can create negativity and bitterness, and one of the things about resentment and bitterness and negativity is that when you're in that place and you're in a place of judgment and black and white thinking, then learning stops. Your learning it's not fluid anymore. because you have these concrete judgments, and that stops learning, and it stops your ability from being open to change. And change then is seen as a threat as opposed to an opportunity. So these things have implications, obviously, in our behavior. Well, that has implications in our ability to lead and to be effective in leading others in a way that is going to be the best for all of us. So one of the things that's important when we talk about this, and we're moving more into why we have to even talk about trauma-informed leadership. Obviously, we're looking at what is the impact of stress on the body. It has a biological impact. This is something that is hardwired. This isn't someone being willfully naughty, or wanting to create a lot of drama and problems. This is about something that is happening to our body without us knowing it. And when that happens, we begin to operate in a place where we don't have skills to handle certain stimulus, certain things in our lives. So let's talk about the threshold of tolerance. A threshold is a point at which we perceive a stimulus and we act on it. We're born with a large number of physical thresholds. We have a hearing threshold, below which we cannot hear, right? We have a noise threshold beyond which noise becomes intolerable. We have a pain threshold beyond which we cannot tolerate pain. But we also have an emotional threshold. And when we exit this threshold, when we exit our ceiling or our floor, we're no longer able to tolerate that emotional trigger that we're experiencing. In other words, we're unable to use learned and skilled behavior strategies to cope with it. So let's look at what that looks like. So if you have a normal range of emotions on a day, and your emotions get high, you maybe get activated, maybe you're upset, and then you realize and you start to de-escalate yourself and work yourself back into a place of normal, or you start kind of anxious on the day and you're able to move yourself back down to a place of normal, and then you get reactivated by something else. As long as you stay in your band, you have skills in there. You have intentional skills that you have built to be able to moderate your behavior so that you can self-manage your way through that experience or through that day or through that hour, right? But if you exit your band, there are no intentional strategies that are built, no frontal lobe strategies that are mapped out for you to help you cope. And the way you know that is that you are doing things in response to your experience that really have nothing to do with the experience. And so this is the example I usually give when I'm out presenting, is if someone says something to me that I find offensive and I allow my feelings to get hurt as a result of believing what they said, and I go grab a chair and I go out into the parking lot and I throw it through their windshield, you know I've lost my skills, right? You know that I'm outside my band. I've exited my band. I am now way above the band. I'm out there where there's no skills, because throwing a chair through a windshield has nothing to do with me letting my feelings get hurt. And the reality is that my feelings were hurt, and I didn't know how to handle that. And so I handled it in this bizarre way where I didn't have a lot of skills. Well, when we grow up and when we are exposed to environments that are not overwhelmingly stressful in childhood. They're not traumatic. They're very equitably spread. When we do have stress, it's supported stress. Then our emotional bandwidth is pretty large. We have a pretty good band in there to be able to manage ourselves when we get activated, right? But if we've grown up and have a history where there's been a lot of stress, or we've had to defend ourselves, or we've had to protect ourselves because of what we experienced in childhood, then our band is more narrow and we exit more often, right? And so we're in a place of no emotional management skills far faster. than someone that would have had a different type of childhood and be able to have built other skills. So this is just a graphic to kind of help us conceptualize what's really happening in our neurobiology. It's something you can talk to kids about. These are the types of things you can use in the workplace. But again, I want you to be thinking about how might your leadership be impacted if your ability to self-manage is narrow? How might your leadership be less than you would like it to be if you have less intentional skills? And if you're going to be a trauma-informed leader, whether it's in your household, whether it's in your community, in your neighborhood, whether it's in your faith-based institution, whether it's at the workplace, it doesn't matter where it is. You need to know that there's a lot of our population out there that has had these types of childhoods. And so you don't know who is in the group that you are wanting to lead. You don't know what the statistics are. What you do know is that most of the data that we have and a lot of studies that have gone out there, including the Adverse Childhood Experience study, is that it could be anywhere from half of the population to 2/3 of the population that have had at least one episode of overwhelming stress or trauma in their childhood. And we know that depending on how often that was, it could have had an adaptive impact on that person's biology, which would then in turn have an adaptive impact on their ability to hear you when you're talking about things that are theory-based, that are based out of skills coming from the frontal lobe. And if their skills are primarily in the hindbrain and you're trying to connect with them using frontal lobe skills, there will be a disconnect. And it's important as a leader that you understand that, so that you are not judging, not shaming, not blaming of others and yourself when you're activated, but that you understand who you're working with and what that looks like. So one of the things that we talk about a lot in the workplace in terms of leadership is the ability to stay out of the triangle. I'm sure many of you have heard of triangulation. Many of you have heard about the ability to create drama. But I'm gonna go through these roles with you and just see if you recognize any of these in your workplace or in your relationships with other people. So first, we're going to start by talking about the first role. The first role is, we're going to just call it, for lack of a better term, the persecutor role. And this individual many times victimizes other individuals in the triangle because they see themselves as being misunderstood, they see themselves as being disobeyed, they see themselves as being hurt or victimized themselves by the actions of others, and begin to lash out at individuals around them. So here are some things that would describe the persecutor role. I'm so tired of people not doing what I want. We're going to change, or else I'm going to do something about it, right? And if only people would do what I ask, I wouldn't have to be this way. I know this is unpleasant, but so-and-so is bringing it on themselves. So in other words, all my actions are based on other people's behavior, right? They're not based on my own worldview. They're not based on my own values. They're based in the fact that other people are controlling me to be this way. Now, you're not acknowledging this if you're playing this role, because if you could acknowledge that, you wouldn't do this. But this role acts from the lens most of the time, many times, that he or she is the victim, right? And wouldn't have to act this way if others would just change their behavior or their choices. They do not see themselves as accountable for the misbehavior. They believe they're forced to act this way due to other people's behavior. Then let's move to the rescuer. The rescuer is a really fascinating role. Some characteristics of the rescuer: this is many times a nurturing person, a helpful person, someone who wants to caretake others, take care of it, they care about people, but they also find a way to be important without empowering other people. They find a way to build their identity based on how they solve other people's problems or help other people through their life challenges. You know, what would this organization do without me? There's so many problems. I'm so glad I'm here, right? Or else goodness knows what might happen. And if so-and-so knew how much I helped them under the radar, they would never let me leave. You know, I just can't figure out why so-and-so is always struggling. They just can't seem to do what I can do. I can solve almost anything. And this role finds his or her identity in gaining the approval and need from others. And without this attention, he or she is left feeling lost. This person needs to find out what their own beliefs and worldview is and stop living other people's lives for them. And so basically, again, this person acts based on other people's behavior. They're not living their life. They are solving and living other people's lives. And they're not in their own life, in their own values, in their own worldview. And I want you to think about this in the workplace. Think about this in a leadership context. When you're in the workplace and you hear a lot of decisions made out of fear, you hear decisions made out of, you know, and go back here thinking about the persecutor role. Think about a lot of the leaders in organizations in the positions of director or CEO. They make decisions that are based of fear of losing money, fear of being in trouble, fear of getting their own position cut if they don't get other things in play, fear of having things reflect on them poorly that maybe they didn't have direct control over. And so again, they're not acting based on their own values. They're acting based on fear of other people's behavior. Now let's go to victim. Victim is the one that people are most familiar with. And I want to be clear that in this triangle, we all jump from role to role. Now, some people really like their role and they stay in that role and they like decorate their corner. You know, they have like 2 chairs and a lamp and they just love that place and they stay there and that's kind of the role they play. But most of us dance around the triangle when we're in it. We can move from victim, boy, you know, I can't believe so-and-so's doing this to me. I'm going to go do this to them. And then we dance to the persecutor. And then someone else says, yeah, that happened to me too. And you go, yeah, you know, I just can't believe that that happened. And you become the rescuer of that person. And you just dance, dance, dance around this. And leadership really is not occurring in the triangle. For leadership to occur, for trauma-informed leadership to occur, you've got to get out of the triangle. And there's no shame or blame if you're in it. Right? There's no shame or blame if you're in the triangle. It's how long you stay. So it's really important that it's not, it's your length of residency in the triangle. It's not really whether you go there or not, because we all go there at some point or the other. So the victim description, you know, nothing goes right, no one's communicating, I can tell I'm becoming more negative, I'm probably not happy here, this is probably not the right place for me because everyone is so dysfunctional. I'm seeking out people who will let me complain all the time, which means I'm not building my own skills. I'm becoming more avoidant and resistive to change. And again, the bottom line is you're acting based on other people's behavior. You're not acting and deciding things based on your own values or worldview. You're acting based on your fear of other people or your blame of other people or your feelings of helplessness and powerlessness vis-a-vis other people. And the victim has another dynamic that is a layer to not lose, is that if I blame everything on everyone else, then the reason that I'm doing things the way I'm doing them or acting the way I'm acting is not my fault. I'm not accountable for that. It's all everybody else's fault. So then I get stuck in blame and shame and I can't find my way out. And really, I can't change unless everybody else does. And so again, I just want you to be thinking about these dynamics when we think about leadership, trauma-informed leadership, and the absolute necessity that self-awareness is our first step of who am I? What do I value? What do I believe? And this is, if you have had to grow up And these skills have not been necessary for you to create. If your environment was too threatening for you to spend time thinking about this, then you're going to have to practice these things to be a great leader, to be a trauma-informed leader, to be able to work with people who are great leaders, right? So you have to know, what do I value? What's important to me? What's my worldview? What happens to me when I'm hurt or sad or afraid or happy? What do I spend the majority of my time thinking about? What do I want to do with my life? What would I like to know more about me? And on and on. And really spend intentional time not thinking about others and what they believe and what they want you to do, but you and what's important for you. And this is just really good to understand the biology again, the significance of managing triggers. When you begin to get activated to go leave your threshold or to produce enough cortisol that your frontal lobe and midbrain begin to shut down, you don't have long. You have between 8 to 15 seconds to stop that trigger and self-manage your way out of that. Because if you don't and you get a full infusion of cortisol because you feel threatened, and it could take 6 to 8 hours, it could take a whole half of a day to metabolize all of those chemicals out of your brain and get back to a place of normal. So you really have a narrow window to prevent yourself from going to all of those assumptions and blame and judgment and self-protection and defense. And those are really challenging things to navigate and practice on how to respond to, so you don't go into a full defense mode. We talk about knowing when you're out of what's really happening to you. Earlier we talked about being present, right, and knowing that you're what is really happening, not what's wrong with you, not what someone else is saying, not what someone else is doing, not trying to gain approval from someone else, but what is happening to you. Are you having a positive reaction to something? Are you sad over something? Are you afraid? Are you hurting? That is what is happening to you. And when we lack safety, physical safety, emotional safety, when we lack that safety, then we don't want to disclose what's really happening to us. So we move into these different personas. Personas of anger, personas of manipulation, personas of deceit. You have a public versus private you. You have a work versus personal you. There's even organizations that operate that say, when you come to work, you leave your personal stuff at the door, and then you don't bring that to work. And I honestly don't know that that's physically possible. I think if you don't have the safety to express in a healthy way what is happening to you in your workplace and in your relationships, then that workplace doesn't understand that trauma-informed lens. It begins to shut down safety, and what that means is what it receives from you then is not your true self. It is going to receive from you some other persona that's not real. So your creativity, it won't derive the most benefit from. Your innovation, it won't derive the most benefit from. So it's important on the leadership front to know what's happening when you are no longer safe to express what you believe and what your needs are. Then the organization does not benefit. You do not benefit. The relationships don't benefit, because relationships are not successful if they come out of these false personas. Boundaries and accountability. And we talked earlier a little bit about accountability and how it gets skewed, but it's really important to have the safety to understand what is my part of a situation and what is someone else's part of a situation. Where do I end and someone else begins? When am I accountable? When is someone else accountable? We talk a lot about power. And power has some pretty bad connotations sometimes. And really, power is not a good or bad thing. You can use power in a very positive way, and you can misuse power and have very negative outcomes. And in leadership, you really want to access personal power and use it in a very honorable way. And so part of that is to understand what part of any situation belongs to you, because that's the only part you have control, where there is control to make a change, right? Whether it's in the workplace, whether it's in your relationships, your part is the only part you can really change. And when you don't understand boundaries well and you get all into the other part, someone else's part, you don't have control there. You don't have any personal power there. So what happens is, because you can't control that environment, you begin to coerce them or manipulate them or deceive them to get them to do something you want done, because the truth is you can't control it. You don't have the control there. You don't have the keys on that side of the fence. So what ends up happening is the false self of you begins to come out and try to make change where you can't. And then that creates a breakdown in the dynamic between you and that person, or in that project, or in that vision for the future. We talked about empowerment being key, and personal power, using it in an honorable way, is so critical. And to do that, you really need to be able to focus on your needs and be engaged almost all the time in a self-management assessment. Where am I? How am I feeling today? How am I feeling physically? How am I feeling emotionally? Am I beginning to feel unsafe? If so, am I safe enough to articulate that to whom I'm around? But this piece here is the key to really giving yourself the freedom and safety to be in that place where you can explore yourself and live your life and not everybody else's. So again, the power to choose, right? You're really trying to embolden yourself so that your behavior is not based on everybody else's behavior. Your behavior is based on your values, on your thoughts, on your belief system. It is not based on whether someone else will hurt you if you say something a certain way or not, or whether you will be punished if you don't say something they want to hear, et cetera, et cetera. So again, it's personal power, empowerment, the power to choose. All of these things are really important so you understand what part to play in leadership. And trust. Is trust a choice, or can trust be earned? A lot of people think trust can be earned, that if I behave a certain way, I can earn your trust, and then you have to really give it to me, right? Because I've earned it. I've been trustworthy. And then if you don't trust me, something's wrong with you, because you really should trust me. And for the sake of trauma-informed leadership, we really want to focus on trust being a choice and not being earned away from you. Until there are perfect human beings out there that never make mistakes, it's really hard to earn someone's trust 100% all the time. So it's important that trust is a choice, and it's given by the person that has the power to give it. And we can probably have a whole webinar just on that. So again, self-awareness, really important. That it is really important when you're triggered that there is a pause between the trigger and the reaction. And that pause could be a breath, it could be a prayer, it could be a meditative state, it could be counting numbers in your head, it could be sitting down and writing something. If you don't have a lot of intentional frontal lobe skills built on managing triggers, a simple pause in between a trigger and your reaction will cause that to be a response, a simple pause. And we can talk about all the different types of ways that you could engage in pause. There's another individual in the organization that does a lot of training around emotional intelligence, Becky Dale, and she just really gives a rock star presentation on this. It can talk about ways to self-manage through stress and what to look for and how to explore self and your interaction with others, where you can look at a bigger resource, a bigger bag of tricks to figure out how to pause when you're really activated. This is hard for all of us. We all have different ways that we pause, and to pause before we react takes a degree of safety and a degree of self-confidence that you're okay with someone's disapproval if you pause. Sometimes pausing can trigger someone else to go into disapproval because you're not answering right away, right? So it's important to build that sense of self so that pausing is possible, because it's one of the most critical ways you can self-manage your way to a response instead of a reaction. And again, practicing this today is really just a very simple overview on what trauma-informed leadership is. And you want to really practice skills to be emotionally healthy when you're safe and calm and don't need the skill, right? So that when you need the skill, it's easier to access and to perform, because that neuro pathway is stronger and faster and faster and faster because you have been practicing it. And it is no different than building any other skill, whether it's playing the piano, whether it's playing an instrument, whether it's practicing your art, whether it's writing, whether it's riding a bike. You practice and you practice and you practice. And then when you have to have that skill, it's much more natural to access physically. It's a physiological phenomenon. So I'm going to jump forward here to why trauma-informed leadership is different, why it's different from just typical leadership models. So let's look at Forbes magazine here. I included a link for you to go to the 10 qualities that make a great leader according to Forbes, and this is what they say: honesty, the ability to delegate, communication, a sense of humor, confidence, commitment, positive attitude, creativity, intuition, and the ability to inspire. Those are all really good and they're really important. So let's talk about 5 components of trauma-informed care leadership. Trauma-informed leadership, why do we need a trauma-informed leader? Well, because half to 2/3 of our population has had at least one episode of overwhelming stress or trauma, and they need to heal, or they need to gain awareness of that impact before they can lead or follow in a healthy way. And the second piece is the trauma-informed leader has to understand that the population is filled with people who have suffered at the hands of someone else's leadership, the misuse of power and control that comes from unhealthy leadership. And the trauma-informed leader prioritizes safety and healing along with empowerment and accountability in order to bring people from different points of health, readiness, and learning to an enhanced state or condition. This trauma-informed leader understands that there are multiple types of safety, not just physical safety. There is emotional, spiritual, cultural, cognitive. There's many different facets to a human being, and so there are many different facets of safety. And it's important for leaders to understand the different dynamics of those and how they get transmitted into the workplace. And then finally, successful trauma-informed leadership not only helps us achieve our individual and collective goals, but it guides us to become healthier in a holistic sense. And that positively impacts everyone whose life we touch, most specifically our children, right, our future. And impacting our children has a generational impact on all of us. So let's talk a little bit about different characteristics, right, of the trauma-informed leadership model. It's looking at the whole person reality in our society. not pieces of a person, not the person that comes to work and leaves them their personal life at the door when they come to work, but the whole person. It's understanding the neuroscience. It's understanding the experience dependence of our brain. So then the importance of relationships and relational theory. It's understanding the critical importance of safety in the workplace and the sciences as they evolve and how it impacts our brain and how we learn, and the science of epigenetics, understanding the impact of our stress on our DNA and on risk that we transmit to the next generation. These things are incredibly important to understand when you're working with a large population of people. And a leadership tip there at the bottom, the best way to change policies and practices and protocols is to change philosophy. We talk all the time about systems change and changing policies and practice. But if you start with changing philosophy, the policies and the practices change naturally, and those things just evolve in a natural way. One of the characteristics of trauma-informed leadership is the understanding of the science of stress and the definition of safety as both physical and emotional. Again, it's so important to repeat that the safety, it's not about physical safety in the workplace. It's about emotional safety so you can be your true self wherever you are. It's creating that safe space so that you can voice positive and course-correcting feedback to each other, back and forth. So you spend more time celebrating when something goes well. You have patience and respect for each other. You work alongside each other, not over or under each other. And this is a really big, this is big. Most organizations have organizational charts that are hierarchical. They have someone at the top. They have people under that person. They have people under that person and people under that person. So instantly, there is a dynamic of superiority and inferiority in the organization. And you know where you are on that continuum. You know who is over you. You know who is under you. And you have now, without even maybe knowing those other people, you have defined them as over you or under you, right? And so as an example, in our organization, we changed the organizational chart to where everybody is horizontal. We're all side by side, and the work is what is underneath us. And we focus more on the roles, the differences in roles, what is integral in someone's role versus someone else's role. And that doesn't transform this hierarchical way of thinking by itself, but it opens up the safety in the organization so that those conversations about working alongside each other and focusing on roles and scopes of work versus superiority and inferiority, those conversations are in a safe space to be able to discuss and work through. You're building a culture, and you have to create the space for conversations to occur so that innovation can happen as a result of that. There are intentional boundaries with trauma-informed leadership. Boundaries. It's important to know where innovation can occur, what part that you actually have influence over in your role, understanding that victim lens so you don't ever get into the victim lens. You don't ever, when there's intentional boundaries in a leadership environment, you understand what roles each person play. And then you're less apt to get all into someone else's stuff, and they're less apt to get into your stuff. And instead, you see how your stuff works synergistically, right? It encourages true involvement from everybody. It encourages honesty with the staff team. It focuses on the art of language, avoiding labels, possessive phrases like my staff, like my administrative support staff, like the hierarchy we mentioned earlier. Labels and possessive phrases on a staff team can be deadly in morale. And when someone has an unsafe feeling in response to that, and they don't have the freedom to be able to voice that in an appropriate and healthy way, then you will not get the benefit of all of that person. They are going to compartmentalize the unsafe space away from you, and you have instantly set up a dynamic where you're not going to be able to have all of them there. You have just, in essence, had part of them left at the door when the workday begins. You're focusing on roles versus status. You're focusing on roles versus titles. You're focusing on roles versus power. And this helps staff see themselves as more autonomous. They're more responsible for their role, and they're accountable to everyone because everyone's role is critical, right? So it's a very emboldening and empowering structure. You help the team see how imperfect and how creative we all are. You help the team see possibilities and solutions even in the most stressful conditions. You admit when you're stressed. You admit when you're scared. You admit when things are difficult for you. Transparency is not just something you offer sometimes. It's a constant. It's okay to be wrong. It's okay to make mistakes. And you will be healthier every time you admit that to the team. Accountability and courage keep us from seeing ourselves as victims. It's, again, trauma-informed leadership is about empowerment. It moves you to another place. You have created a safe space where you can grow and you can make mistakes. The thing that is difficult, it's in an organization that really focuses on, or an environment that really focuses on trauma-informed leadership, the thing that we miss almost every time is we don't want to make mistakes. We're afraid. Again, we go to fear. And it's not about the mistakes. Mistakes are normal. They're human. You don't want to really make them. It's not something you really want to do all the time. But it's okay if you make them. What's not okay is if you're not safe enough to admit you made it. That says a lot about the environment. It says a lot about your self-awareness and self-management. That's when there's a problem. It's not as much that the problem is with the mistake. That can always be corrected, right? You encourage discovery and conflict. What is the why behind our reactions? Why do certain things bother us so much? You guide the team in understanding active resistance. Most individuals describe dynamics of procrastination. When they wait to the last minute to get something done, they see themselves as either in a neutral place or procrastinating. But the reality is you're either procrastinating, but the reality is your procrastination is active resistance. You are resisting doing what you know is best to do. And it's important for the team to understand that active resistance takes enormous energy. It takes a lot of energy, and if you could channel, if you had the safety and the willingness to channel your resistance into action, you would feel better, you would have less stress, and you would have a sense of accomplishment and achievement. But you have to be able to figure out, why is there active resistance? Is it because of the culture of the organization? Is it because of how the organization is operated? Or is it the willingness and self-management of that particular member of the team? You guide the team in understanding learned helplessness. That over time, if they have learned that someone else is going to take care of them, then they have learned not to do, not to act. And then they create a culture of waiting to act, waiting on someone else to come in and do it for them or come in and intervene. And so you have to help them first, not punishing them because they're in a place of learned helplessness, but to help them understand what learned helplessness is and when examples of it rise up and bubble up in the organizational team. Guiding the team in understanding mindful ways to mend connections between the members of the team. Not letting things sit, not letting things wait till frustration is built and gotten bigger, but instead to be able to safely say, gosh, I was uncomfortable when you just said what you said. And I really don't like the way I feel when I get in that place. those types of safe conversations between your team members will help you be more transparent, help honesty continue, and help everybody believe in each other at a different level. Building capacity for self-management and or increased mindful containment. The example of that is when you are in a public setting and you hear something that you really allow that to trigger you, really allow that to bother you. And instead of blurting it out in an angry way there, you're able to have mindful containment. You notice your reaction, you notice your response, and you decide intentionally to hold that until it's the most appropriate time and way to discuss it further. And these are skills that have to be built. You rarely go into any staff team where everyone is really professionally able to self-manage all the time. Okay, so you have to understand that there's a continuum, there's a readiness that evolves over time. And then one that's really important is avoid making assumptions as much as possible, or at least acknowledge when you're making an assumption. I'm getting ready to make an assumption about someone else's behavior, and to make sure you preface that comment with that. Understanding that each member of the team matters. They should offer their insights. They should have the space to build confidence in order to offer those insights. And they should have the courage to cope with the consequences of sharing those insights. And that's really much harder said than done. But, you know, most things are harder said than done. Or harder, yeah. Seeking strengths in self and in seeking strengths in others. Making as many suggestions from observing strengths as you do when you see things that are perceived as weaknesses or areas to develop. Most of the time, a suggestion box in an organization fills up when people notice what's wrong. You should try to have a suggestion box or a suggestion feedback group that builds based on observing strengths. Okay? Having that gratitude, celebration, and appreciation for each other. And then who can be a trauma-informed leader? Who can be someone that's trauma-informed as a leader and really take this out into the world? Every one of us can be. We have a fabulous parent leadership team in our organization. We have this philosophy is really embedded deeply in our staff team, on our board of directors, and our parent leadership team, and our funding, our funders, our stakeholders. It's really important to us that we operate in a healthy way. And that doesn't mean we always do, but it's important to us that that is a value that we work and strive towards together. We all have power. It's how we use it or misuse it. We can all understand our social and physiological reality as a community, as a society. We all have stress. Stress is normal. Many or most of us have had overwhelming stress or trauma. Overwhelming stress, we're finding, is more the norm than not, unfortunately. And our systems and our leadership models, our professional and personal development rarely takes this into account. We can all be emotionally healthy. We certainly can all work to be emotionally healthy and lead others to be and do the same. We can focus on relationships and values as keys to positive change. And we can work differently with one another, again, safely and alongside, not over and under. So at this point, we have about 10 minutes left. And does anybody have any questions? This would be a really good time to ask those now. And so I will turn it over to Kate, and she will mention some of the questions that we've had come in over the last hour or so.
Yep, and feel free to either raise your hand and I can unmute you, or you can enter a question in the space provided in the questions section. I see one question that is there a way to undo the negative portions of the brain or portions of brain development?
There are. We used to think that the brain was static and that we were born with a certain number of brain cells, and from that point on all we could do was kill them. And we know now that that's not the case. We know that our brain is plastic. It continues to build new neurosynaptic connections our entire life course. So yes, you can, and it takes practice. It takes a lot of intentional choice and decision making, and it's hard, but it's very achievable.
There is another question. Is it possible to get a copy of the PowerPoint? I took some notes but had a hard time keeping up with some of the slides.
You bet. I did go fast on some of them for sure. You can, we will have the PowerPoint and the audio associated with it uploaded on the website. Kate will take care of that for us. Kate, when do you think that will be
I can do that today. Yep.
Okay, so at some point today, there will be the ability to access that PowerPoint and print that off. And if you have any problems with it, don't hesitate to contact us and we will work with you to get you a copy some way. Are there any other questions? We still have a few minutes. How many of you see some of these characteristics in your workplace now?
We have a comment from somebody participating saying that all of the webinar trainings have been very informative, and this one has been the most beneficial for her, so she says thank you.
Wow.
And we have a question. Can you talk a bit more about the victim in the triangle?
You bet. The example that I give a lot of times when I present this is an example in the workplace. Let's pretend that I sent, and Kate, I'm going to use you. Let's say that I sent Kate an email, and as soon as the webinar was out, was over, and I sent Kate an email and I said, Kate, I really need you to get this project done, whatever that project is. I really need you to get that project done by 5 o'clock today. Okay, because I need it in the morning. But I haven't ever talked to Kate about it before. Kate takes that email. She doesn't respond to me, but she prints it off and she goes to Becky, let's say, because I think Becky's on here too. She goes to Becky and she says, can you believe that Karina sent this to me? She knows how busy I am. I've been doing the webinar. I've got 100 different things I've got to get done by 5. I cannot believe that she would do this to me. And Kate would be acting out of the victim mode. I would be in the persecutor role, and Becky would be the rescuer role. And Kate would say, you know, I just don't know if I'm going to be able to do this, and maybe Kate starts to cry. Kate doesn't cry a lot, so I don't know that that would happen, but let's just pretend, you know, she gets really upset. And Becky, if Becky were going to try to be healthy, could say, and not serve as the rescuer, Becky could say, you know, I bet if you went and talked to Karina, that you could probably work it out, because she probably just sent that email and really didn't think much beyond, you know, what else you had to do. Why don't you go talk to her? And then Kate could come talk to me, and then we could work it out. Now, if Kate came and talked to me and I was really a persecutor and I didn't have a good, healthy response when she came and talked to me, she could stay in a victim role. She could stay feeling like she was mistreated, she was undervalued, she was not appreciated in her workplace, she was being overworked, she was being underpaid, and she could go talk to people on staff. She could talk to some of the parent leaders. She could talk to her family. She could talk to her friends and begin to tear down the leadership collectively of the organization and what we stood for. And she could just really begin to take that to a new level of how bad it was. And if anyone ever said, did you ever work this out with her? Did you ever go and talk with her about this? And she said, well, no, I didn't, or well, yes, I did, but I didn't get the response I wanted. And then they're like, wow, maybe you shouldn't work there. Maybe that's not the place for you. All of those suggestions are things that would solve the problem. Her no longer working in a place that was unhealthy, maybe her coming and talking to someone that might be able to help her solve it or work through it. Those would be very powerful positions for her to take. But as long as she's just complaining and reacting and blaming, she's in a victim stance that prevents a solution from occurring. And I know all of us have had that experience in the workplace and at some point in our life where it's not real healthy and there's a lot of complaining and bashing and blaming. But the honorable trauma-informed leadership response would be to say, no, I need to go talk to someone that can help me solve this. And I don't necessarily know what that's going to look like. I don't know how it's going to turn out, but I want to be honorable and I want to be honest and I want to talk about my discomfort and I am confident enough in myself that I can have those types of conversations. So just as an example, there's a lot of examples on the victim lens. You know, if you drive to a meeting in Minneapolis and from St. Paul and you're late and you blame all the drivers, but you don't ever take accountability for the fact that you left 10 minutes before the meeting and it took you 35 minutes to get there in a big metro area, you could say, well, you know, I'm not going to blame the drivers that were going slow in front of me. I'm going to instead blame, you know, I'm going to take accountability and say, next time when I have a meeting in Minneapolis and I'm driving from St. Paul, perhaps I will leave further in advance, you know, farther in advance so that I don't have this problem. So just looking at the victim lens really stops learning.
Karina, this is Kate. We have one more question that we might have a second here for. I know we're running up to the end of the webinar here, but kind of a good last question. Do you have any resources for assessments or documentation of action steps towards trauma-informed leadership? So maybe any final resources that you'd recommend?
There are, and what I'll do is I'll put together a list of resources so that when we upload it to the website, you'll have those as well.
Okay.
And what was the other question?
That was it.
Oh, that was it. Okay. I was trying to be brief. So, yep, but I can definitely upload that. One of the things that I can think of right now just as a final resource for you to look up is the Sanctuary Model by Dr. Sandra Bloom, author of Creating Sanctuary. And she talks a lot about the impact of stress on the workplace and the staff, and then how that gets passed around the staff environment and really begins to deteriorate the environment unless health, safety, and wellness are prioritized in the work environment. But I'll give that to Kate and she can upload that when she puts those resources on the website.
And just so everyone knows, again, the website is www.pcamn.org.
Okay, awesome. Thank you all very much, and don't hesitate, as I said earlier, to contact Kate or I with any questions, and we'll see you on the next webinar.
Thank you.